Started. Okay. All right. So let's get started. Welcome everybody to Dao De Jing, and Jason and Amon have the freshly minted translation for the next two. I think it's going to be 60 and 61. So let's get started. Everybody is welcome to read. We're going to start with 60, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So everybody is welcome to read their favorite translation of 60. And then Jason and Amon will be presenting theirs. And then we will have a general discussion. And then we'll go to number 61. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark in order to read. We're going to start with Kwan. Kwan, go ahead.
Okay, translation by Professor Roberts, stanza 60. Rule a great state as you cook a small fish. Through the way take a ruler's place in the world, and the ghosts of the dead shall have no force. Is it that they have no force, or that their force can do no harm? That their force can do no harm, or that the wise Lord does no harm? Nor ghosts nor the wise Lord doing harm to their joint virtue thus redounds.
Excuse me, Juan, what's the last word?
To their joint virtue thus redounds, meaning to be double, to be twice the same.
Oh, okay, got you. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Penny. Penny, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm going to read the J.H. MacDonald. Governing a large country is like frying small fish. Too much poking spoils the meat. When the Tao is used to govern the world, then evil will lose its power to harm the people. Not that evil will no longer exist, but only because it has lost its power. Just as evil can lose its ability to harm, the master shuns the use of violence. If you give evil nothing to oppose, then virtue will return by itself.
Thank you, Penny. Next up is Cho.
That was fast. The GF Fang, I'll read. Ruling the country is like cooking a small fish. Approach the universe with Tao, and evil is not powerful, but its power will not be used to harm others. Not only will it do no harm to others, but the sage himself will also be protected. They do not hurt each other, and the virtue in each one refreshes both.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Jason and Amon. Go ahead.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Chapter 60, Governing a Large Nation. Govern a great nation as you would cook a small fish. When Tao prevails over the world, ghosts lose their spiritual powers. Not only do ghosts lose their spiritual powers, but even spirits cannot harm the people. Not only can spirits not harm people, even the sages do no harm to people. Because neither ghosts nor sages harm, the returns to the world.
Thank you, Amon. And this one is very short, and I believe this one should be very famous because in the 1988, Ronald Reagan's the State of the Union, and he quote the sentence, govern a great state as you will cook a small fish, and I think he said don't overdo it. Okay. And then that's his insertion, okay? Because in the text, it doesn't say don't overdo it. And I think the better way, well, the text, original text doesn't say it. It just say govern a great nation. Actually, you should translate it as a large nation. I should change it to govern to a large nation, because large doesn't mean great. Large doesn't imply great. Okay. a large nation as you will cook a small fish. And Ronald Reagan said, insert the words, don't overdone it. Okay. I think he said that because during the time is his peak time, and the correction of Russian, USS, Soviet, and he probably talk about Russian overdo it, and probably give a warning or advice to China, because that's the time is China is rising, opening, and then that's Ronald Reagan's political philosophy. They did it alone. Okay, so I think that's it. That's why this one become famous. And in my opinion, I think what Dao De Jing talk about, like cook a small fish, I think he meant don't disturb it. Okay, so if you cook, if you cook a fish, you keep flip over and try to stir it, and you will mess up. And then, of course, you can argue, say, why govern a large nation as you will cook a small fish? Why not just barbecue steak? Okay, so that's another question, but that's a metaphor used by this text. Another thing I'd like to mention is definitely this one is very political when I read it, right? So you talk about use a metaphor. He put a metaphor first, right? Like cook a small fish. Then he talk about Tao, right? Like using Tao. That's his message, using Tao. Then he gives the example, say using Tao, the ghost will not be powerful. Then talk about the spirit. Okay, that we can suppose ghost is not good one. That's why some translation translate as evil. Then spirit, okay, it has no power. Okay, then sage will not hurt people, right? So I think here also reveal one of the important difference between Taoism thinking and Confucius thinking. Taoism thinking, even both Confucian and the Taoist thinking about sage as a model, but their sage has a different role. Confucian sage is doing something good, and Taoist sage is withhold, not doing something. So that's why he would, this text will say, even the sage will not harm people, right? Because if you do something, just like you disturb when you cook a small fish, then it will harm people. So to me, that's the message from this text. So I'm interested, the translation part is last sentence, right? 故德交归焉. That's, I translate as 德 return to the word. I put a parenthesis here. It just say 归 means return. I still looking for a better word, and then here so far I still use return. That means you use Dao and the De, okay, will return back to this word. So that's the message. So Aman, please.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I actually love this passage because it's so easy to be anachronistic with it. It was very easy for Reagan to insert the tiny little addendum, don't overdo it. Or another translation says, too much poking ruins the meat. There's almost a uncontrollable urge to editorialize. But take Lao Tzu at face value. What does he say? He says that one should govern a nation as they would cook a small fish. Full stop. Yes, that implies care and attention and not, but it implies a few other things as well. If you really think about what is it to have a small fish for dinner? Well, it's to be consumed whole. You aren't going to be filleted and putting out bits here and that. You are consuming the whole thing as opposed to a large fish. So if you govern the nation like you cook a small fish, you're preparing a nation for whole consumption, for all who are within it. That's another interpretive possibility when you just read govern nation, cook small fish, like cook small fish. The other thing I want to point out about this chapter is that he talks about when the Tao prevails. Right after giving you that metaphor, we talk about when the Tao prevails. And it may seem strange that there's talk of ghosts or spirits harming people. It's worth knowing that spiritual testimony was admissible before a Chinese judge up and through the Ming Dynasty. It was still considered valid, admissible evidence in a court hearing. And so it wasn't just superstition or the, the plebeians that Lao Tzu's talking to here. He's talking to people who make decisions about everyone's lives, and he's speaking in language that speaks to them as well. And when the Tao prevails, none of these, not even the sages, who usually are invoked as the most beneficent of beings, but only if the Tao prevails, then can they do that no harm. Or it should say, not only, but when it prevails, this is the result. Absolutely, they will do no harm. That doesn't mean it can't happen outside of that, but it's no kind of guarantee. And by getting to this point where the Tao is prevailing, the whole of the nation is up on the dinner plate, as it were, for, all to consume, then Da returns to the world, to the nation, that identity of what we were talking about, that national identity. We speak of nations, there was no such thing at that point, but the empiric identity returns to the world, or the kingdom's identity returns to the world. So as much and as easy as it is to just read this as a prescription for laissez-faire government, I really encourage readers, think what the other implications are when a minnow is on the menu for dinner, and how you would treat that, and how it would be, what it would mean for you or for any consumer. Ugh, I didn't mean to end on consumerism.
All right. So folks, your comments on number 60, go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to comment. Start with Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this actually speaks to the relationship with the individual and the whole, and how they relate to one another. And it's consistent throughout the entire Tao. So this idea of how to lead, how to govern others. And that is not imposing your will or fear as a way of getting what you desire. It's actually respecting the autonomy of the individual and how that relates to society. And so Tao 17, I think, captures this thought quite well when it says, essentially the leader is basically not interfering, and the people say themselves, we did it. So that there is this kind of mutual respect and mutual protection for both. So I also think it really speaks to the importance of personal integrity. So that no matter what, that you don't necessarily go down to the individuals that may be attempting to push you to do something that you don't necessarily feel to be correct. So there is this idea that if even the sage would actually know when to act, not to impose their will on others. And so there's this this balance that exists. Anyway, right now it's basically our well-being is linked to the others, and I think that individual virtue, something emerges from virtuous behavior that doesn't necessarily emerge from enforcing rules.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Quan, Paul, Madeline, and Penny. Quan.
Okay, so I would like first to say that this stanza is probably one of the most outstanding stanza from the Tao Te Ching concerning government and relations with the public, because most of the time, and it's probably unfair, but when we think about Taoism, most of the time we will think about the mumbo jumbo of religious Taoism, okay, with a lot of superstition, with a lot of ghosts and spirits intervening in human affairs. Well, the Taoism of Chuangzi, of Laozi, of Lizi is a philosophical Taoism, okay? It is the exact contrary of the religious in the bad sense of the word religious, because we can have a good sense of the word religious, of course. In the bad sense of the religious, let's say superstitions. And here we have an excellent example of high-minded Taoism, philosophical Taoism. The second thing is that, very strangely, most of the time, once again, Confucianism is associated with rationalism or rationality in terms of human affairs. But let's not forget that at the time of Confucius, the Chinese aristocrats were having pretensions that their ancestors were spirits that would help them to establish their domination in world affairs. And they managed to make the peasant believe it, okay? So Lao Tzu was not the only one. A century later, a guy named Mo Ti or Mo Tzu, Master Mo, will also insist in the fact that you don't have to grant credit to the spirits or to the pretensions of the aristocrat telling you that their ancestors are assisting them in order to control you, okay? So here, we also see that the high-minded Taoism is towards more rationality. And in this case, Confucianism has the bad role, okay? Because it's clear that in the past, the Chinese aristocrat of that time were trying to make the people believe that their ancestors were assisting them in their endeavors and in their enterprise of dominating people. If I want to give an easy rapprochement with the West, for example, Caius Julius Caesar that would pretend that his family is coming from the goddess Venus, for example, okay, stuff like that. Finally, the last thing that I want to say that in Confucianism and in legalism, there's a principle saying that the only things that the state should take care of is rituals and war. And here we see that the ghost and the rituals and the one of the privileges of the Lord, meaning to declare war, are intimately related. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Quan. Next up is going to be Paul. Paul, go ahead. You had a question. Paul, are you there? Can you
Paul, you're muted.
What's going on? Paul, I see you
Did
busy.
this work?
Okay, there it is. Yes, go ahead.
Sometimes on this external monitor, I lose the control of the mouse. That was my crashing, sorry. So thanks for your patience. My question is about the sages, and up till now, I think in both, like when we were reading the Analects and these texts, the sage was used in such a respectful manner. They were always the one that was contrasted with the person who wasn't living by the Tao, who wasn't, and the sage was, in my understanding, the one who was sort of above reproach when that term was used in the past. I may be wrong about that, but in this case, it's saying that the sages can go wrong, which I'm not used to. But tell me your thoughts on that. I'd love to hear them. Also, just a quick point that you talk about the Ming Dynasty, and that's when they finally got rid of spiritual things in court. Well, here in Salem, where I live, they were still doing it until 1692, when they finally decided spectral evidence was no longer acceptable. So it shows how backwards we were in terms of catching up. Thanks.
So let me answer your question. I think that's very make it clear. Okay, when doesn't matter which school, even then I'm sorry, legalism or Confucianism, Taoism, Moism, and whoever talk about sage through the Chinese history, when you talk about sage, always a good guy, okay? Never be bad, okay? Nobody criticize sage, that's number one, okay? But what sages did, okay, or will do, it could be different from Confucius, from Taoism, okay? So apparently here is different, right? He said the sages doesn't hurt people, okay? So he is talking about Confucius. Well, that's my interpretation. Implied Confucius' interpretation of sages may hurt the people, okay? And then sage will not hurt people because they practice Tao. That's why sages were not practicing. And of course, Confucius will say different way, right? He will say sages, because they practice ritual, they use ren, okay, benevolence. So it's good. So the world will be peaceful, okay? Everybody will be happy, whatever. So if we have a democracy today, well, if we use Chinese tradition, we'll say, well, sage in America, okay, American sage will do American kind of democracy. So everybody will be happy, okay? So I think that's the language we Chinese use, yeah.
I want to jump on those coattails just to offer sort of a contemporary rhetorical device that might hit our ear the same in the West. If you were to read, even the saints could do no harm, that's going to jar you a bit if you're a follower of the saints. If you have watched corruption in a certain, sect, and their saints are no better than they are, in your opinion, when you hear that, you also read it and go, oh, okay. So in your utopia, even these people who have been, elevated are incapable of committing harms, which I am of the opinion they've committed. That's kind of how that rhetorically works in the Dao De Jing.
Thank you. Thank you, Amon and Jason and Paul. Next up is Madeline, followed by Penny. Madeline.
Yes, thanks, Shrikant, and thanks, Jason and Amon, for yet another wonderful translation. I have a suggestion for the notes at the bottom, which is after the numbered notes, especially on one like this, that you just add a couple of sentences that start with cultural context, : because as I recall, there was a difference between spirits and ghosts. I don't know if we discussed it on this passage the first time around or in the discussion of Moism. So that would be one thing to put in there. And the other thing would be what you said about up until the Ming Dynasty, it was accepted as testimony. Then this whole thing makes a lot more sense, because even if you all are going to think, we'll put this into a big introduction or something, a lot of people don't read introductions. And especially with the Tao Te Ching, a lot of people do bibliomancy. It's like, I think I'll just open it to a passage and see what's happening with it. So I think that would help people a lot.
Any comments, Jason or Amon?
I like both these ideas.
Yeah, okay, so let me specifically restrict on the translation part. I translate 鬼, okay, as a ghost, 神, okay, another word as a spirit. It may not be 100% correct in all Chinese ancient texts, but that's the way I choose in Dao De Jing, okay, in this text. Both are not in general. 鬼 ghost has means something, like people after death. Okay, so that's like a soul, but more tangible, moving around in this world. 神 spirit is not about dead people. It's everything has spirit, especially in the Dao De Jing, which we concerned is happened on the south part. Okay, not today's south, but during that time, in the Yangtze River part of China, they believe like I think many times it show talk about the mountain, talk about the river, a valley. They have the spirit, so kind of like pantheism, this kind of belief. That's the translation.
Right. Thank you. Next up is Penny. Penny, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make a quick comment about the very first verse about govern a nation like cooking a small fish, because at least as a cook, I think a small fish, you would have a very simple, straightforward preparation. You're not going to have a lot of adornment. You're not going to have a lot of sauce. It's just going to be very simple, straightforward preparation. So with the nation, with the people, then the same way, just deal with them very simply, very straightforward, not a lot of rigmarole, not a lot of extras, just very simply.
Amon.
I just wanted to say, because Penny brought this up, and it's the other thing with a small fish for dinner, odds are you really appreciate that small fish if that's all you have for dinner. And that is something else that one who's governing a large nation should have appreciation for it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Nick, and then I think Mark had something. Let's go with Nick first.
Hi, Srikanth. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just want to comment on Paul's question and see if I could offer an alternative, slightly different interpretation, which is a hypothesis that Taoist, especially Laozi, had much less respect of the authority of the past than compared to the Confucianism. So therefore, the difference to the sages for Laozi wasn't as that pervasive as when we read the Underlies, for example, or any of the Confucianist classics.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, let me provide another way to read this one. Okay, so one way to look at this one is Confucius talking about Confucius talk about the sage is so-called Yao and the Sun, which is 5,000 years ago. Okay, not 5,000, about Huang probably know better. Okay, but anyway, okay, then the Duke of the Zhou. Okay, Duke of Zhou. Okay, so they talk about past, and the Taoism also talk about past, but his past is even more before Confucius sage. That's the Yellow Emperor. Okay, so instead of disrespect Confucius past sage, he go even further past. Okay, that we can read another way. It's like this. Yeah.
Juan, go ahead.
So Jason is right. The Yellow Emperor is about 2700 BCE, and Yao and Sun were about 2500 and 2400 BCE. So they were apart about 3 to 4 centuries. But the main philosophical idea that Jason wants to transmit is that Confucius was an aristocrat wishing to maintain the superiority of the aristocratic class. Okay, so at that time, the rituals, the ceremonies were a tool to impress the people, to show that the group of the aristocrat, having the ancestors and so on, are a group that is supposedly superior and consequently are legitimate to be at the head of the state. For Laozi, and because Laozi, let's not forget, was also a kind of aristocrat, okay, because they were rebellious aristocrat who didn't agree too much to the framework of the Rujia, okay, because let's never forget that Confucianism was a group of aristocrats from cadet branches. So they were interested to propagate education. And what is special with Confucius is that he was generous enough to offer that education that was the privilege of the born aristocrat to everyone. But let's not forget also that that generosity has a consequence, is that the peasants who would accept his framework, his ideology, would accept the framework of the education of the aristocracy as the legitimate framework for organizing the society. Okay, so so it has, let's say it's win-win, it's given. For Laozi and Mozi, and Mozi was a peasant from his origin, okay, but a very bright one. And it's probably one of a very rare exceptions in Chinese history of that time, of the classical period, that you have a philosopher of that standing who was a peasant. And it is not a surprise that the teaching of Mozi practically disappeared when Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty in 136 BCE chose Confucianism, because, of course, being an emperor, he was not too interested to have that kind of teaching from Mozi to be propagated, of course. And Laozi was much more for personal thinking and critical thinking. And here, I'm not forgetting that I'm also a promoter of Confucianism. Confucianism also promotes critical thinking, but within the framework of the aristocracy. And Laozi promotes also critical thinking, but not taking into account the framework of the aristocracy. I stop here, meaning rituals, essentially.
Thank you, Quan. Now, Mark had something. Mark, you wanted to see the translation again? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sometimes I like to take a screenshot of it so that I can refer back to it, but I guess one of my questions about this was, I know that the translation, even the sages do not harm people, has been the subject of interpretation tonight. I was looking at the Boston University where they have the 8 parallel translations, and there were a couple of them where the sage was not the subject of doing no harm, but rather the object. In other words, no harm was done to the sages. And I can sort of cite which ones those were. Whaley is one. I'm not sure I know who that is.
Okay.
And you get the point.
Yeah. So you say that it's not to harm the sage as a sage as the object. I just have to say I never read this way. I just don't see there is a possibility to read this way. 圣人亦不伤人，圣人 sage is the subject. Ren is the object. So it's no way to different around. Here remind me one thing. One of my friend told me he come to Taiwan and then in about 6 months speak almost perfect Chinese. And he told me Chinese is the world's easiest language to learn. And I was shocked. And he said, that's so easy. Because just remember that's the subject, that's the verb, that's the object. And the subject could be 1 word, 2 words, as a verb has 1 word, 2 words, and the object could be 1 word, 2 words. It's always in this center, and never change gender, never have the past tense, the words never change. So in this case, it's the worst simplest case. Okay, so in this way, that's why I see there's no way to read sage as a object. Okay, so that's my explanation.
Yeah. If I may interrupt, spoken Chinese, if you're not afraid of the tones, is probably one of the easiest language to learn. It's only written Chinese that can be complicated.
Thank you. Next up, I mean, just a small comment. Those tones are very hard, Kwan. And is Chinese
They are
without
challenging,
tones?
but so many words, especially in modern Chinese, come packaged together that you hear them as a set so often you don't even necessarily catch the tone. You just hear, 中道. Oh, okay, that I know.
Okay, thank you. All right, next up is Joe, followed by Penny. Joe.
Yeah, I have one quick question is that sometimes this can Tao be misinterpreted in being the sense that it's oversimplified? Yeah, I mean, and I think this is an instance where we could be thinking about this because we're thinking about the idea of what is right action, what is the right balance. So there's an element of wisdom in this. And so it's not simply smaller, bigger, or something like that. That's oversimplifying it. It's more about limiting your desires as to what your outcomes are going to be. So if you're not, why do you create rules in the first place? Many times it's to create, to have an outcome, to what to create something so that what, right? As opposed to just being with nature. And this is an idea of, well, it's very kind of cerebral but at the same time, when you do take an action, it has to be strategic. That's all. It's not necessarily done with force. So it's that balance between the two that it's really kind of seeking. So it's not necessarily there's this just this idea of just smaller. That would be too simple to kind of when you're I think breaking this passage down. And I think that this is kind of one of those points where we can apply something simple to something very complex and come out with disastrous results because we oversimplified something, as opposed to actually strategically in thinking about what the right action is, because that's and I think that's part of the importance of when we think about this particular passage. And it's a question actually more than a statement, but.
Go ahead, Amon.
I was going to let Quantac live because you asked the question about can it be misinterpreted? Freaking-lutely. And it has been tons of times in many ways. But when you talk about strategic action, therein lies probably the crux of this. It doesn't say don't cook a fish. But if you're going to cook a small fish, how are you going to approach it? What are the things? And what Penny said before about simplicity is very much in action there. This is a recipe of Wu Wei. action, there is no action, which is not do nothing. It's do enough and not one single shred, one iota of excess beyond that, because enough is enough. And learning the sensitivity to discover that is really what the Tao Te Ching is trying to teach its reader, is to find that sensitive enough point. There have been misinterpretations of this where enough to some dynasties was a fire hose, when really, a cup of water would have done the trick. And then there were certainly emperors who also figured enough is if I just, show up to court a day or two and let somebody bow at me and I'll let them handle it. And how did the empire just go completely to pot while I wasn't looking? Yeah, enough. Cook the fish. Cook it just enough, but just enough.
Thank you, Amon. Quan, did you want to comment on this one?
Yes, it's about Joe's question. I would like to go back to the first line of the stanza, okay? Rule a great state as you cook a small fish. For me, what is the central need or the central quality when you cook a small fish? You have to be very careful, okay? Because a small fish can be destroyed very easily. You have to be very careful. So what is to be very careful is to be absolutely aware, okay? Because my obsession is that the teaching of the old master is about the ultimate awareness, the constant norm, okay? To repeat the PG translation, but because I absolutely adore that, because Srikant, you being in from an Indian background, you know that if someone is capable to be in pure consciousness for 48 minutes, he becomes enlightened, okay? So there is a relation between time and timelessness. So that's precisely that the absolute need to be totally aware at each moment when you cook a small fish. If not, you will destroy the small fish. So it is precisely that the Tao, okay? If you are a sage, meaning that you are an enlightened being or Buddha, if you use Sanskrit terminology, everything would be ziran, as the Chinese say, meaning natural. Okay, it would go spontaneously, naturally. That's the catchphrase of the Taoist, ziran, natural. But that ziran, that many people would associate with nature, and it's not completely wrong. But that ziran is your spontaneous natural nature, okay? That is absolute awareness. And when you are in that absolute awareness, everything you do would be fine, okay? And that is the absolute message that is always repeated. But if you're the slave of the mind, meaning the intellect, okay, in that sense, because mind in English has many layers. But when I say mind alone, it means the intellect. Wording, conceptualizing, imagining, predicting stuff, planning, things like that. It's there that you won't bring harm to the society because you think that you're very clever. And sometimes your plans will work, of course, they don't all fail. But many times it will bring more complications. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Quan. Next up is going to be Brian, Paul, and Madeline. Brian, go ahead.
So in listening to all the comments, I do have a suggestion. I'd like to get Jason's reaction. He said at the beginning, maybe a word other than returns. The for de returns, to me in this sense, and I know we don't want to translate de, but it has a sense of, to me, it has a meaning of common sense. That's what I'm hearing from everyone. And you might say common sense emerges. And the reason I suggest that is that there's a reference to the ghosts, to the spirits of the sages. These are all some forms of authority that come upon people from the outside. And the suggestion in the text is this should not come, to me at least, the suggestion in the text is that when we don't have these ways of thinking or thoughts imposed from the outside, then the common sense of the individual and of the people emerges. And that ties in with what Aman said about the identity of the nation. It emerges, the identity, the common sense embedded in individuals and in the group. And I also think that makes sense because they did not use the word Dao here instead of De, and De refuses, I think, refers to some individual internal spiritual or mental processes and not to the broader natural. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Okay, so first let me talk about the word de. Okay, so that's my opinion. I will say in Dao De Jing's reading the de, if you force me to choose an English word, and probably power, okay, or capability, could be the right word. But if it's in the Confucius, okay, reading, the de has a moral meaning on that. And then in the Taoism is like immoral, let's put it this way. So I kind of, well, of course, the Tao Te Ching text is not a complete rigid structure. It's very loose. So you have a lot of room to interpretation, just like the first stanza, right? Govern a large nation as you will cook a small fish. There's many ways to read it. Like Kwang will say, oh, that means you have to be awareness. Or awareness means what? You could be very careful taking care of that, or don't overdo it, or don't interrupt it, or don't put too much sauce on that, just like Penny talked about this. So there are many ways to interpret it. It's we all free to interpret. That's the beautiful part of reading this one. Another thing I'd like to comment about the last sentence, last stanza, right? I translate as the return to the world. In a way, just like Brian said, remind me, it could means the power return to the people, not to the sage. Okay, if you want to read in the modern way, so I will say, okay, because the text doesn't say, I just put the parentheses, I just assume have the return to the world. And another way I think right now I probably think about take out the parentheses because it doesn't insist return to the world. It could return to the people. If you think this way, the power is not in the sage, okay? It's not in the ghost, not in the spirit. The power belongs to the people. That's another way to read it, and that's no conflict with this text, and no conflict with overall Taoism interpretation. So that's just my suggestion. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Paul and Madeline. Paul.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. That gives me a different angle on all these possible interpretations that I was thinking of proposing to see if it's way off or if it could be, which is this thing about the sages. We've been like, if it says even the sages, it has this implication that, oh, those crazy sages, they're constantly screwing things up. But a way of completely eliminating that is to say that it doesn't incriminate them in any way. It's like if the whole system is off balance, out of balance, then good things, sage-like things, can't always have a good effect. Like I equate it to maybe an immune system in the human being. So it's a beautiful, powerful system, but if something's way off balance in the whole environment, it can actually kill it. But it's not kind of the immune system's quote unquote fault. Is that a possible way of getting the sages off the hook in this as an interpretation of this?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Okay, so another thing we can look at is chapter 5, right? The beginning is talk about the sage is, let's see, I can show the screen. Okay, let me show the screen in the old translation. Okay, chapter 5, okay, the beginning talking about the nature, okay, the second line talking about 圣人不仁, okay. So this word in Confucius, if you show up in the Confucius analect, it will be very odd, right? Confucius keep talking about ren, which is benevolence, okay? But you say sage is not benevolence, okay? So what's the problem here? Okay, so I think here you can, the interpretation is the 圣人, okay, the sage, do not practice this because the ren, which is hurting people, okay? That, I think that's another way to read it. And so you can have your own way of reading, and that's no right or wrong. And I think the well, not only Dao De Jing and all the ancient texts or modern texts, I think the purpose is not you agree or not agree. It probably just give you some more idea, and you start to thinking about something more.
All right, so we are at the 9 o'clock mark. So quick comment by Madeline, and then we will go to number 61. Madeline.
Yes, thanks, Shrikant. So I had read the Moss Roberts translation before the meetup, and in his note, he said that the first line seems to be very isolated from the rest of the text and doesn't appear together with the rest of the text in every version. But during this discussion, I've come to see how well it fits. When I think of, everyone's comments so far, I think of cooking a small fish. Whether you're poaching it in a small amount of water or you're frying it on a griddle, you're going to use a spatula to lift it out and maybe turn it. And if you get spirits and ghosts and everything involved, that's like poking at it with the spatula to see if it's done with the edge of the spatula. And as soon as you start inserting something like that, the whole thing falls apart. So now I think that it does fit. So thanks everyone for the conversation.
Madam, thank you for bringing up this. Okay, so I will say a lot of chapter, the some part is like insert or misplaced, but this one I don't think so, because that's a common logic. The Tao Te Ching is using. Usually put the very first line as a comment, just like very or they put the metaphor and the very last. I think that's the very common thing. It sounds like not connected together, but it use a daily life as an example, as a metaphor.
All right, so we've been cooking this small fish for about an hour or so. So now
we
let's
overdo it. We overdo it.
Let's no. So this is just the right time to stop and go to the next one. So let's go to number 61. If you'd like to read it, go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. We're going to start with Quan. Jason, could you handle the moderating for the next hour or so? I'll come back at 10 o'clock to continue my discussion with Quan on how to do I Ching. Okay. Jason, go ahead.
Okay, Quan, please.
Okay, so translation by Professor Roberts, stanza 61. A mighty kingdom stays downstream, female of this world below, where all courses intersect. Dame holding still has ever conquered sire. But to hold herself still, she must remain below. By lying below a small kingdom, a great one takes it over. By lying below a great kingdom, a small state is taken over. By moving lower, the greater takes over. Lying low, the smaller is taken over. A great kingdom seeks no more than to absorb and protect. A small state no more than to enter its service. Thus, for both to fulfill their desire, lower must the greater lie.
Thank you, Kwang. Joe, do you want to host? Can you host?
Sure,
Okay, so why don't you host? Yeah, so I can focus on the text. So thank you.
sure. So I'm the next one to read. So I'm gonna, oh, actually, I'll go to Penny first. You're on mute, Penny, I believe.
I was going to read Jia Fu Feng,
Oh, okay.
or do you want me to read something else? If you're going to read that, I could
That's
read.
perfect. No, actually, that's great. Go right ahead.
A great country is like lowland. It is the meeting ground of the universe, the mother of the universe. The female overcomes the male with stillness, lying low in stillness. Therefore, if a great country gives way to a smaller country, it will conquer the smaller country. And if a small country submits to a great country, it can conquer the great country. Therefore, those who would conquer must yield, and those who conquer do so because they yield. A great nation needs more people. A small country needs to serve. Each gets what it wants. It is fitting for a great nation to yield.
Thank you, Penny. I don't see any other hands up or exclamation points, so I'll read Stephen Mitchell. When a country obtains great power, it becomes like the sea. All streams run downward into it. The more powerful it grows, the greater the need for humility. Humility means trusting the Tao, thus never needing to be defensive. A great nation is like a great man. When he makes a mistake, he realizes it. Having realized it, he admits it. Having admitted it, he corrects it. He considers those who point out his faults as his most benevolent teachers. He thinks of his enemy as the shadow that he himself casts. If a nation is centered in the Tao, if it nourishes its own people and doesn't meddle in the affairs of others, it will be a light to all nations in the world. I see David is next.
Yes, this is like a what makes a great state is its being like a low-lying, downflowing stream. It becomes the center to which tend all the small states under heaven. To illustrate from the case of all females, the female always overcomes the male by her stillness. Stillness may be considered a sort of abasement. Thus it is that a great state, by condescending to small states, gains them for itself, and that small states, by abasing themselves to a great state, win it over to them. In the one case, the abasement leads to gaining adherents. In the other case, to procuring favor. The great state only wishes to unite men together and nourish them. The small state only wishes to be received by and to serve the other. Each gets what it desires, but the great state must learn to abase itself.
Thank you, David. So I don't see any other hands up. Does anybody else wish to read their preferred translation or would like to hear any other translations? Feel free to suggest.
Okay.
We'll go to you guys.
Chapter 61, Staying Low. A large state should be at the lower position, like river delta, on which the world converges. It is like the female organ of the world. The female commonly overcomes the male with stillness. By stillness, they stay low. Therefore, a large nation can stay low to small nations to gain something from the small nations. A small A small nation can stay low to the large nations to gain something from the large nations. That is either staying low in order to gain something or staying low but gaining something. The large nation only wants to provide and care for people. The small nation only wants to join and serve people. In this way, both the large and small nations can get what they want. It is better for the larger one to stay low.
Thank you, Amon. Here I think that I can make clear on the some translation as the like the mother of word, and I will insist that it's not mother of the word because the words use pin. Okay, pin. Okay, it's not use mu as a mother. Okay, so they have the different implication. Even both means female. I think I mentioned before about male, female, or you want to call it the yin and the yang. If you talk about sex or the different gender, or you want to call it, they have the metaphysical level, they will call yin yang. Okay, it sometimes means sexual intercourse. Okay, it's in the metaphysical level. If you talk about human level, they will talk about man and the woman. The words Chinese use the word the nan and the nu, man and the woman, right? And if you do it in the animal level, they will use pin mu. Okay, so it doesn't mean that the animal sex. That means humans animal side. So here in this text, it doesn't use the text doesn't use man and the woman, doesn't use yin and the yang, doesn't use father and the mother. What it use is pin mu. Technically, it means animal, or it means the sexual organ. Okay, so here is very clear. It talks about the large state. Okay, it will be stay in the lower position and in the converse, on which the words converges, right? You can think about all the river going down, and during that time, people fighting for the water resources, right? You have an advantage, stay in the upstream, because if they have too much water, you can discharge the water to the lower land, right? If you don't have, in the drought, they don't have enough water, you can put a dam to hold more water. So you always have the better advantage staying upstream. But here, the Taoism teaching is talking about staying in the lower position, which had the advantage. And he used the example is male and the female. And I think we don't have to further explain why, because he talked about female advantage because it's stillness. You don't have to move. Okay. And then blah, 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 that's and stay in the low. I think that's what the text is talking about. And he used the male, female as a metaphor to talking about the international business. Okay. So I think that's this text is talking about. And they have a little bit difficult for me to translate. And I look at many English translation and also include many Chinese interpretation. I don't find a good word-to-word translation. Even in Chinese, it doesn't explain very well. But I figure out another way to read it is that's the sentence, right? We have to know, talk about the large nation only want to provide, okay, 欲, okay, 监畜人, okay, I just have to interpret as provide and care people. That's the intention of the large state. And for the small state, it's want to 入世人. Okay, I just have to explain as join and serve people. Basically, it's a word-to-word translation. Okay, so in this way, both okay have the advantage to stay in the low position, and then finally he talked about it's better for the larger state to stay low. So that's the basic. I do word-to-word translation, and then I think logically probably makes sense because the essence here is the Laozi try to tell the state stay in the low position, and then you take what you want, and then we can consider the previous one is political, talk about how to govern a state. Here, chapter 61 is talking about how to deal with international affairs. That's my interpretation of this text. Yeah, Aman, please.
Thank you, Jason. And it is always nice to sort of hear the more provincial translations, especially going back, excuse me, to James Legge, who I've said before, I have the utmost respect for, but his 19th century English aristocrat sensibilities show up in his not deigning to translate Hin very very accurately. And I think you're absolutely right. When you talk about Hin, I put the translation into the chat. It's, yes, the carnal aspect of what makes a male or female, in this case a female, the female sex organs. And it's also it's also viable to use that word to say valley or keyhole. And at least one of those two is also very present in the translation, the idea of being the valley that all converge to. I wanted to also drop the word xia into the chat because it's kind of the crux of this chapter, staying xia, which low is absolutely correct. This is also where you get tian sha, below or low to tian, under heaven, under, low, beneath. You can just take a look at the character, the second half of the chapter title there, and it indicates something below a ceiling or lid or being beneath. Being beneath is always treated as the undesirable position for most people in general terms. And I will go a step further and say most young boys who would be the audience of this text absolutely don't want to be beneath. The one-upsmanship is kind of the name of the game. And so this would be a rough sell for that 14-year-old, young ne'er-do-well aristocrat who's going to inherit the kingdom. But Lao Tzu drives the point home through real-world example, talking about how does the world work? Look at the low position. There's the great river there. Everything returns to it. All these tributaries go to it, and everybody uses it. That's how you get around. That's where, we wait for the flood to sow the fields so that we have agriculture. I mean, the metaphor speaks for itself in a very concrete way to the Chinese mind of that time. Madeline asked, was agriculture or aquaculture a big thing in China? There has been an argument posed before by many a historian that control of the waters of China was to be in control of China. And it has been the perennial exercise of every leadership of the nation for centuries, because you have two giant rivers that run north and south, the Yellow and the Yangtze. And the Great Canal was one of the giant public works projects to try and connect the two. Dredging that, controlling it, figuring out its, yes, water water acumen was what would give somebody the right to say, I know how to run this country because I know when to tell the people, hey, get to high land. There's a flood coming down this way. Lao Tzu is taking this and bringing this metaphor home in a very real way to a very unreceptive audience, using something that does appeal to that a 14-year-old boy, women, that you can relate to, that you can think about, that you can recognize. See how much power they have over you. See how easily you dote upon them. You return everything. Suddenly this metaphor starts hitting home. His message sells because he's not, bandying about or being flowery or trying to pretend that he's talking about something else. He makes it really clear. This is how that power happens, male to female. This is how that power can happen, nation to nation. It's just up to you to, try and harness it and put your one-upsmanship inclinations, penchant for one-upsmanship, in check when it becomes at the expense of everyone else in your nation, all under your heaven.
Thank you, Amon. That was perfect as always. Let's see. So next up we have, I believe it was David was next.
David was reading, and anybody have any comment, any questions?
Yeah, that was just regarding Leggy. I agree that his choice of words is very antiquated, but I also seen that, especially compared to Jason's translations, that at least to me it comes across as much less, not affected, that is a much more closer to a exact translation, that he has less sort of adding his own twist or philosophy or his own interpretation on top of his translation, for better or worse. So, so you get the very sort of stiff and maybe affected vocabulary, but a little bit less interpretation and translation compared to some of the more modern translations, in my opinion. Just curious if other people's thoughts about that.
I wanted to say, David, before just taking advantage of position. Yeah, I agree. Leggy, I give him a little grief because he was the first, but what he did was remarkable. And he did have a real inclination to try and stay faithful to the text as much as possible, while also being considerate of his audience. His audience just happened to be 19th century aristocrats. And so the coloring changes every once in a while. But I absolutely love reading Leggy's work because I do think he set the bar for every English translator of Chinese text after him.
Are there any other comments? If not, I got a couple of questions that I don't know. Madeline.
Yeah, I just thought I would put in 2 cents worth, which is that this it sounds like the small state is joining with or in the service of the large state, but not being completely engulfed by it. And it reminded me of the discussions there have been in this group about the difference between the concept of a melting pot. Like you've taken everything and put it in a blender, and the Chinese concept of harmony, which is more like a stew, where everything retains its original flavor, but it's all blended together in some way. And I wonder if that's what this is referring to with the large states and the smaller states.
Anybody wish to comment?
I can comment on this one. Okay, that I first let me just focus on this text per se. At least I don't see the melting pot or still pot. Okay, any kind of this kind of message here. But what I read in this one is talking about the large state just want to do something, okay, and the small state just want to do something. So basically it's talking about the large state want to provide something and care for the the people, and then the small state want to join and serve people. So what's that exactly mean? I don't know, okay, but that's the essence is talking about. And then why not just be peaceful? You can say it's too idealistic, but that's the message it said. Okay. So at least I think that's probably the only one in all of the Dao De Jing talking about international affair. I'm not very sure, but sounds like that's one of the probably only one talking about international affair. So that's the part on that. So it happened in 1,000 years ago, and in this way we appreciate, what the thinking.
Thank you for that. So we have Quan followed by Brian, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it's about international affairs. And in China, or in the Chinese thinking, in international affair, you have essentially two methods or two ways or two approaches. The first one is called Wang Dao, and Wang Dao means the way of the king or the kingly way. And the second one is Ba Dao. Ba Dao means the hegemon's way. And here he's speaking about the Wang Dao, meaning the kingly way, meaning that the powerful state should lie low in order not to intimidate or to bully the smaller states, so that the smaller states would feel more comfortable, more in confidence to be in relation with that big state, and that the big state should try to woo, to seduce the small state by offering things rather than by forcing its presence on the small state. And precisely the other ways, the other methods, Ba Dao, meaning the hegemon's way, is precisely to impose yourself by sheer power and sheer force upon the others. So, and the idea of the stew, I think it's very interesting, because I think it's precisely the way that the Zhou dynasty imposed itself in its heyday, because it's a lot by the control model, which is, I don't know what is the principal ingredient in the stew, maybe the sauce, maybe the soup, but let's say that's the soup that is combining together, or would bring together the pieces of meat, the vegetables, the carrots, the potatoes, etc. That would be the symbols for the smaller states that would go into the soup or the broth of the stew, which here is the culture of the Zhou dynasty. And when the first empire has been created in 221 BCE, even if the social organization change, technology change, population increase, and so on, it was still basically the philosophy and the culture of the Zhou dynasty, which persisted still today. I stop here.
Let me comment on this one. Two things. One is about the stew or pot. Madeline is talking about. Chapter 60, previous one is talking about this. Sounds like the concept, at least my understanding, the stew or a melting pot is talking about within the state. Okay, probably not the international situation. Just comment on Kwong, comment on the two ways. One is the kingly way, one is the hegemon, okay, Wang Dao and the Ba Dao. I think this dichotomy is very Confucian thinking because Taoism reject Ba Dao hegemon, and I don't think Taoism agree with Confucian's Wang Dao or so kingly rule, okay, because Confucius' kingly rule is based on moral, and then Taoism is based on not based on moral, based on non-interfering. So to me, if you said Taoism is talking about Wang Dao, I would say it's disagreed on this part because it's to me I see it's opposite to Confucius thinking. Okay, that's how I read it in the Taoism.
I agree with you, Jason. I would take 30 seconds. I agree with you, Jason. However, we have here, I would say, a sleight of hand. Okay, if the Taoist sage say that he doesn't want to be the king, I agree with that. But by having a perfect behavior and by having the highest awareness, he present himself as a model anyway, even if he doesn't want to be a model. Sometimes, even if you doesn't want to be a model, even if you don't want to be a model, you're still a model because you're so shining.
That's actually interesting. Yeah, Jason, really quickly, while I have you, is you had a comment in there that struck me, and I'm going to get my comment about comparative advantage at some point. But the with international trade, but this idea of you compared it to Kant's perpetual peace. Can you explain that?
No, I just okay. I try not to explain too much on that, but basically Kant, the perpetual peace, basically is talking about I can consider that one probably the first try, okay, in the Western world, try to bring a concept people will international will reach perpetual peace, and then this one is kind of the same concept, okay, and let's forget about it's a practical or not practical, but basically that's the concept of if you're doing this, the world is be perpetual peace. I think that's the idea. I start to thinking about this, which is different than Confucius thinking. Confucius doesn't think about international. Let's put it this way. He think about the kingly and less international. Taoism think more international way. At least that's what I'm thinking.
Are they both speaking about harmony?
I disagree. Well, let's put it this way. I in general, I think you can say harmony, but one Confucius way of harmony is
Right.
man-made, okay, moral, rich harmony. Taoism harmony is based on agree on disagreement. Confucius is based on we all agree on something, and Taoism more on we all agree on what we disagree. That at least that's the way I'm reading.
Yeah, I agree that there's different ways to get there. It's just a question, though, that the idea of what there is the goal. So, and then that's where I was asking. So
Put it this way, okay, we can say the goal is no goal. Okay, that's put this way. Okay.
So I've spoken enough, and I still want to get my comparative trade in, so I'm going to come back to that. But Brian, comparative advantages.
Actually, Quan anticipated my question and what he said. I was interested in the historical context or precedent that this stanza might be looking to in the to understand better what it was saying, and I really appreciate what he said on that point. So I think my question's been answered.
All right, can I take credit for that? No,
Sure.
Madeline, because I let Juan go ahead of me, so.
Yeah, so thank you, Juan. You actually clarified what I was trying to say. I guess I was comparing it to the melting pot versus stew idea. But I was thinking of it in terms of like the Moss Roberts translation said that the small state should stand above the bigger one. So if I think of it as an empire with like satellite states or somewhat semi-assimilated states, if the big empire is at the bottom of the valley or the delta, the smaller state can be slightly above it in terms of a body of water, like maybe a lake that has its own existence, but at the same time feeds into the larger state. Rather than being completely subsumed by the big state and homogenized into the waters of the great state. Does that sound like the kind of the sense of the text?
Like Juan, or I mean, it sounds like I think you have it, but I'm not
If,
the
if we talk about the text, right? Okay. I think the text is not very clear. Let's put it this way. I would say it's not very clear. Okay. And I think that people are all arguing on this text, right? So and I see a lot of translation. Quan, can you read Professor Roberts' translation on this line?
Which one? The fourth line?
I don't know which one. The largest states want to provide something for that. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. If you read that one, we will probably make it clear.
Okay. Okay. So Roberts translate that by the following: by lying below a small kingdom, a great one takes it over. By lying below a great kingdom, a small one is taken over. By moving lower, the greater takes over.
Okay, so it's not word-to-word translation. Okay, basic, you have to, right? It's not a word-to-word translation because there's nothing about take over. Okay, this part. Okay, so we just talk about 监促人. Okay, 促 I have to interpret as provide something, and then attribution or something, right? And then he said 入世人, okay, means serve people, join and serve people. Okay, so if I stick with the text, so it's nothing about like take over, nothing about like making peace, nothing about this. They basically talk about people, like provide people. I just have to assume logically providing more resources for the people. Okay, small state is going to serve for more people. That's I have to say. Okay, the rest will have the interpretation.
At the end of Robert's translation, there are two lines I think which can be interesting. A great kingdom seeks no more than to absorb and protect.
But there's no protect in the text. That's also
exact. Well, the translation of most Roberts is very, I would say, he would understand the general meaning according to him, and he would translate it in English. I'm sure that he read the Chinese stuff first. He would have an understanding, and he would write his own poem. That's a way to translate.
Yeah. I'm not saying that's wrong. I just say
Yes.
I stick with the text. Yeah.
I
And
mean,
everybody just decide what you want to do. I think that's the point.
Yes.
I could ask a question, actually, Quan, that you brought that up, this absorb and protect. But isn't there an element of, instead of absorb and protect, it's just like this integration and mutual interest?
Yes,
That,
because,
so,
oh,
I
sorry.
mean, so
Go ahead.
it's capturing those two words in the sense that there's mutual benefit that's being had between the two smaller nation and the larger nation. So in a way, that concept kind of still is, even though the translation is not one-to-one, the idea itself still holds.
Yeah.
I think that you have the core insight, because if I read, okay, I read again. A great kingdom seeks no more than to absorb and protect. A small state no more than to enter its service. Thus, for both to fulfill their desire, lower must the greater lie. Okay, so it's really the idea of win-win. Okay, thus for both to fulfill their design, and they don't have the same strengths. They are different. It's like the yin and the yang. Okay, it's very Taoist. Okay, they are different. They are not the same, but they can be together, and their togetherness will fulfill the design of both sides.
Right. No, and that's where I was going with the idea of comparative advantage, in the sense that these are very much like economic trade. The idea that each country does what it does well, and that, you know, collectively, and when you're trading with one another, that each party is better off. And the sense is that if you even consider the fact that, and I look at this as being a kind of a dynamic system, and this is how a dynamic system has a balance, that you know, there are things like you'd mentioned, like shifting populations and you know, situations within nature and what the country is going to be able to produce at a particular moment in time, that there's a way of hedging risk, that it's mutually beneficial for each group to do what they do well and to trade together and to be harmonized with one another. So that there's this, and that comes back to the idea of protect, in the sense that there's mutual interest and there's mutual benefit. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Actually took the one sentence that I had about this that I was pretty sure about, is this non-zero sum game, essentially, that exists. And that's the harmony that we're talking about in the, anyway. So I just want to go.
Theoretically, it's what true free trade is about. Okay, true. Okay, insists on true free trade. But in the last 2 centuries, most of the time, free trade has been a fig leaf to impose your own merchandise. But in the ideal world of win-win and of non-zero sum game, true free trade should let each one express his own strength, and that the complementarity of each one would be beneficial for everyone.
Correct. Yeah. And nobody understands trade agreements. It's like, so they're so complex. It's like, it's almost, but it is right. I mean, you're absolutely right. This, if we're both entering into an agreement freely, not being forced, which is not totally, you know, disconnected to what we were talking about before, where there are two parties entering into an agreement, yes, everybody's better off, right? So, right, but to your point, you know, for trade is one of those things that I'm convinced maybe a handful of people in the world understand fully the way the agreements are structured right now. But anyway, I've been speaking too much. Nick.
Yeah, thanks. It's very interesting. But I wonder if I could offer a slightly different perspective to this cooperative reading of the passage. Now, if I were to stick to the competitive context of the situation, it's clearly interstate politics and the advice given, etc. But the question for me is, then what is the principle that's been applied in this situation? And the principle to me is something very similar to the Christian teaching that meek shall inherit the earth, in the sense that the female power, the soft power, actually is more robust than brute force. And that's one of the key doctrine of Taoism. And that has the same conclusion as the Christian teaching of meek shall inherit the earth, but the reasoning is very different, because here the support for the conclusion is really on a detailed analysis of the strengths of different kinds of power. And then he concluded in many of the passages that the soft power actually is stronger than the brute force. Therefore, if you apply that principle to a dealing interstate situation, then if it's strong, but you still need to lower yourself. But if you are weaker, you leverage your weakness. So that's a reading I get. Nevertheless, stay in the competitive context.
Jason or Juan, do you wish to respond to that, or even Ahmad? I have my thoughts, but go ahead.
Yeah, Ahmad, hands up. Then please,
I'll let you respond first, Jason.
Well, I agree with well, it's not agree with Nick talking about this, and then it's one of the key feature in the Taoism. Basically, talk about the female power, softness. That's a very important message in here. So yeah, and
I wanted to try and tie a thread here around all of this, because a couple of reasons. I'm off camera because I'm on granddad duty. So I may have to run shortly. But if I can, I'm going to share a couple of slides from my Taoism presentation, just to address a couple of things and see if we can't have some clarity here. This image I use to convey what the Confucian concept of balance or harmony looks like. It is enduring, it's concrete, it is like this today, like this tomorrow, like this for eternity. This is the image I use for what the Taoist idea of balance looks like, and I normally can have it play, but unfortunately it's not going to do it for me. It's dynamic, it's tilt-a-whirl, it's chaotic, it is only moderately predictable in the sense that it's going to do its own thing. You cannot control the direction, but you can know that it's going to rise and fall of its own accord. As far as the concept of international relations go, it's worth remembering this is what won. This idea is what won. And so, although some of these ideas, these principles were adopted, the idea of China as the center kingdom and every vassal state around it was tributary, like those rivers running to the pond, the stream, the great river, the ocean, whatever metaphor you want to use. That's how it was supposed to be. That's how it would be indefinitely. I'll stop sharing now. Valerie Hansen is a professor who wrote a wonderful, she's the, for those who don't know, she's the Stanley Woodward Professor of History at Yale, and her area of expertise is China and history, religion, and trade. And she wrote a textbook many years ago now, called oh God, The Open Empire, in which she argues that China has always been a cosmopolitan nation, sometimes under duress and sometimes by design, but that this enduring idea of all other nations are tributes, are to pay tribute, and are tributaries to China, endured all the way until the Qing dynasty. And when they encountered England, there was some misunderstanding about who was the superior, who was the inferior, who was the nation, who was entitled to tribute, and thus started the 2 centuries of humiliation. I won't go over all of China's geopolitics. I will use this to say that the idea of harmony and balance are integral to all the Chinese thinkers looking to rule a kingdom. What they envision that looking like may be slightly different, but the one that came out on top, the Ru school of Confucianism, had in its mind that they had got it right. It was this way, and it should always remain this way as a result, because we got it right. And it lost sight of that, sort of dynamic turn that the world was taking. The last thing I'll say before I go, because we were talking about a melting pot, a stew. One of my professors used to say, a nice zesty salad. All these cultures mixed in China in one way or another. All of them got a little bit of a flavor. But Quan, you were asking what the base of the stew was. And I think any chef here might agree with me. It's very convenient for the Confucians that it would be the roux that makes a stew. That's what all the rest of it actually has to conform to be called a stew. So if I have to run, it's because I have demands of a grandson, but and I'm doing it overnight, so wish me luck. I will have no sleep tonight. I'll see everybody next week. I really appreciate the conversation tonight, and thank you all. The feedback's great. Keep it coming. We just want to get our work better and better.
All right. Thank you, Amon. Jason, I'm back. Can I continue moderating?
Yeah. But Joe is moderating. Okay,
Joe, can I go ahead and continue moderating?
Yeah.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Quan.
So I want to say that, well, everything that has been said has been mostly outstanding. And I would say that the vision of government in China precisely is that the Rujia, the Confucianism, is playing the masculine part, meaning interventions, rituals, prescriptions. And the Taoist part is playing the feminine part, meaning the capacity to be open-minded, the capacity to receive new ideas. And I would say that Aman was right to say that the Ru took the upper place, and they were right because they are the masculine part. But sometimes this masculine part is too overbearing and doesn't let the feminine part express herself completely. Theoretically, that dance between masculine and feminine is perfectly understood by the Rujia because they got the same education. The problem is that the people in power, sometimes they don't have enough deep awareness, precisely. They are not in the constant norm long enough to let the other part express itself. And I want to name the third one, which is legalism. But legalism is not really a philosophy. It is principles and practices of statecraft and administration, okay? So it is more the practical tools of Confucianism. Even if they have texts, they have documents, they have own kind of consideration, but their philosophy is either from Confucianism or from Taoism. And a lot of legalists borrow a lot of texts or of basic principles from Laozi, for example. One famous legalist, Han Feizi, a lot of his text is so simply elaborations on the Tao Te Ching precisely. So, so once again, I want to go back to what I see as the image of Chinese culture, a tree, which the roots are the I Ching and the hexagram. The trunk is Taoism and Confucianism with the legalism, not really as a school, but as a tool of Confucianism, and with many branches, including the foreign contributions, obviously. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Quan. Next up is going to be Joe.
Yeah, one of the things, I mean, this example, I think that what Aman had just actually showed us with the two different images, and one being a dynamic system that's less predictable. And then this, sometimes this desire to make something more predictable. And we can't necessarily control the system, so therefore you're looking for the right balance between order and chaos, let's just say, and how to deal with that. And I think that there's something important, obviously, with the at least in many of the translations, this idea of the feminine. And it was which one of the translations that I was reading. Anyway, the idea of how the feminine would respond through stillness or not speaking or not necessarily. And sometimes, and I was in a conversation about this earlier today, about there's nothing more powerful than the unspoken word. And in the sense that even when I was growing up and somebody else had the same reaction, is that it took nothing more than a look. It didn't even take words to make an impression on something. And I think that that's actually an example of not acting, not imposing, and still getting a result. And so and that is, I think, the beauty of the feminine quality is that it doesn't necessarily feel the need to dominate. And that's what we talked about a little bit earlier with what Aman's comments, is that, yes, you know, the males, I don't like to make things about gender, but essentially would not take well to this because they do feel the need to dominate or to be a little bit more competitive, at least the male side of us. And anyway, that's from that perspective is that we're pushing, as opposed to actually there's a stillness that allows things to unravel, but there's still an order within that unraveling. And I think that that's actually yeah, I mean, I think that that's a lot of what we're seeing here being, expressed in any case. And yeah, and then this idea of mutual benefit and balance is there as well, but I'll let Madeline go.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Madeline.
Well, it does seem to me in reading this and the discussions and reading other things that this advice for everyone, I guess meaning men, to tune into the eternal feminine has not been very effective over the course of several thousand years. And I think what the advice really is be more flexible if you want to maintain your power. It's not really saying let's try letting the feminine, the yin energy dominate let's keep it as the dough that the yang makes the cookie cutter impression on. But just be a little more flexible with how you do the cookie cuttering, and that way you won't have a revolution.
Thank you, Madeline. Jason, you and any kind of closing comments, and then we will go to I Ching. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Madeline. I totally agree with you on the female male part, Confucian, Taoism part. Actually, there's a one very common saying talking about, oh, you can do in the weekday as a Confucianism, in the weekend as a Taoism. You do the when you are successful, you're doing Confucianism, and when you are in failure or you are in the best situation, you become a Taoist, which I totally disagree. Okay, even it's a common saying, but well, I should not say I disagree. That's your choice to be. I always want to provide a different way to look at it this way. I want to say I will work as a Taoist during the weekday because I have practice Wu Wei and nothing left undone. In the weekend, I will practice Confucianism so I can study, I can read, improve myself. When I'm successful, I'm the Taoist because I'm thinking about I should retire. I should give more room to the young people to have more opportunity. When I'm failed, I want to be the Confucianist. I want to work hard to make up and to be successful. So that's another way to think about. I'm not saying my way is the right way, but I think that's the way I look at the Taoism can provide. So I will close here. But one thing I'd like to say, I hope Joe Finocchio, don't mind. I notice you probably the best Taoism here because I notice you be very attentive and very engaged, but you speak nothing. So you probably know everything. So if you don't mind, can you speak something?
No, I hardly know anything. It's just, I was taught a long time ago, it's not necessary to always have an opinion. So I thought I'd exercise that tonight. I was kind of, I have the Derek Lynn version, and I was kind of busy on his comments. And I was paying attention to what everybody else was saying. And he kind of goes back and forth between this being, just to paraphrase a few spots here, the microcosm of the personal reflects the macrocosm of the national. So principles that work on one level operate equally well on the other. And then he deals with the large country, and this is on a personal level. He talks about the large country has more power, the small country with less, but everything is relative. We often are called upon to play either role. And then he gives an example that I could relate to. A mid-level manager can be a small country to senior executives and at the same time be a large country to the rank and file, to the employees. And then he goes on to talk about lower position, meaning humility. And he talks about the large country is more powerful, but it should practice humility. It will quickly devolve from a well-respected world leader into despised empire if it doesn't. And as he goes on to say, empires, it shows history's shown clearly that empires come and they go, and we're all aware of that. And then he applies it again. Then he flips back to the individual level of the wisdom of treating people well on one's way up, because you're going to see them on your way down. So that's what I was wrestling with as I was listening to everybody and kind of going back and forth with his commentary. So that's all I really can offer.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And the Derek Lynn's version, I read it. I think it's very good, and I really like it because, put this way, he probably used the same philosophy of translation I'm doing. So I'm glad I didn't read his translation at the beginning. I don't know his translation. So if I know before, then I I will not start the translation project. I will say, oh, this one is perfect. But right now I'm working on with Armand for a while, and I think mine is better. So anyway, just kidding. So anyway, thank you everyone, and then I see you next week. Yeah.